light on satellite radio. Good morning, good afternoon. How are you guys doing? Good to see everybody. Welcome to the Studio Q Show Live. My name is Quinn Jacobson, and we're going to talk about albumin printing today. So we have a interesting kind of tutorial to go over from Sutton's book. This is Thomas Sutton's, you know who Thomas Sutton is. We've talked about him a few times here. So we have, we do have, let's see, we have Pablo in the house. Hola, Pablo. Hola, hola. Welcome, welcome. Hey, Will, good afternoon, Will. Hello, Linda. Oh, and there's we haven't seen her for a while. There you go, Malik from Brooklyn. And Dale, yes, I just looked at your message. I was loading and unloading all morning, so I got your message. No worries. And Drew and Christina, welcome from Bucks County. And Christian Johansson, good, hello. Hey, Thyla, welcome back. I haven't seen you for a minute or two. And Tom, welcome, Tom. May be exciting. I like that, Tom. I like that a lot. I think it will be. I think it'll be good. So let's do this. Hey, Steve, ciao. And Jean from France, Francais, yes. Good, excellent. Let's do this. Let's jump right on in and do this thing. We're going to do a little bit of a, I added a new thing to the show. And that new thing is, share this window. That new thing is called news and social media. I don't know how much we'll do of it, but we'll see if we have anything going on. So here we go. Today is August 21st. This is getting close. We have, 10 days left in this month? And then in the Northern Hemisphere, we start entering into fall. In the Southern Hemisphere, you'll be going into summer or spring, I should say. Sorry, not summer, spring. So let's do this. Albumen Printing, the Collodion Process Wet and Dry from Mr. Thomas Sutton, a great book. If you haven't downloaded this book yet from Google Books, get it. It's wonderful. Published in 1862. News and social media. I'm going to try this for a week or two and see what happens. If I don't have any news, if I don't have any social media stuff, I won't put it in there. But if I do, I will. Technical Q&A. We have a couple of those, and recommended reading and recommended watching. So let's start off with this. I'm not going to spend too long on this, but for those of you that know who Chuck Close was, he died this last week at age 81. He did daguerreotype work, and he did these wonderful, gigantic portraits. He was wheelchair bound for a long, long time. He died this week, and 81. He had a pretty good life, I would say. There was some controversy about him, over the years, sexual harassment and whatever. I don't really know. I just paid attention to his artwork and some of his daguerreotype work. So he died, and we don't get out of that, right? Death and taxes. You know this. We've talked about Becker on this show. Death anxiety. Not to bring that up, but we're all aware of our mortality, right? So anyway, he was a great artist, regardless of his possible personal life and his problems there. So the second thing, I got some screenshots sent to me this week from my Facebook group. Hey, Stand Up for Judas. Good to see you. And on my Facebook group called Wet Plate Collodion Photography, I've had it up, 10, 12 years, something like that. Somebody asked about doing a course without a course and a book and all this stuff. Well, and for those of you that stood up for me, I appreciate that. But there's a couple of people on there that really, got a little bit violating, if you will. And not only did they violate the standards of the Facebook group, which is, ad hominem and slander and courtesy and kind of spam stuff, people that I don't even know. It was deleted before I got to see it. I got to see a couple of screenshots from it. I'm just going to say this. If somebody comes on that board and starts, the fox watching the chicken coop kind of thing, people, you know, getting out of control, I'm just going to delete you, period. I don't have time for that stuff. If you don't know anything about my book, don't say anything about my book. If you don't like my book or have comments on my book, do it professionally. Don't attack. And, you know, it looked like a couple of these people were just completely out of their league. They didn't even know what they were talking about. And again, this was all deleted before I got on there. But just FYI, there are group rules in that Facebook group. I see somebody that's outside of those standards, I'm not even going to say anything. I'm just going to delete you, period. So just keep that in mind. That's all I wanted to say about that. And again, for those that had nice things to say, I appreciate that. And I'm not looking for praise. I'm not looking for anything. I don't care if I sell another book in my life. I really don't. I mean, I'd like, you know, if you need references and you like my writing style, you like my teaching style, grab my book. If you don't, I couldn't care less. I just don't need it. I don't need to sell any books. I really don't care. I don't monetize YouTube. I don't do Patreon. I don't do anything like that, right? I don't need it. I do this as a kind of a community service, if you will. So if you can't appreciate that, you don't understand that, you know, if you don't have, like they say, if you don't have anything good to say, zip it up. Okay, onward we go. So this week, we're going to talk about making albumin prints via Thomas Sutton's method. And Dale Wilson in Canada was kind enough to work through some of this, and we'll show you what he's done, and he can chime in here if he wants to. But I just want to talk a little bit about albumin printing is not my favorite pot printing. I like it. It's good for certain things. A lot of people love it. They absolutely love albumin prints, and I don't disagree with that at all in the sense of aesthetics and all that. Depending on what you're after, depending on the aesthetic you like or not, albumin printing may be something you really get into. A lot of people have problems with it because of the paper, some of the extra steps. It's a little bit complicated for some people, but I just wanted to show you, I'm going to scream through this. This is a clip from me making this albumin print. I'm just going to scream through this and show you this clip about making an albumin print. So first off, you need a good wet collodion negative. Can you make albumin prints from modern silver gelatin negatives? Sure you can. But if you really want to get the true look and feel of this pot printing out process, wet collodion negative serves or answers the call better, I think. So an albumin print is a silver chloride print. It involves coating a sheet of paper with egg white or albumin, making the paper surface glossy and smooth. We're going to talk about single coat, double coat, triple coat the paper, triple coating the paper, et cetera, a really important part of this. It's then coated or floated on silver nitrate or coated with silver nitrate. We're going to talk about the percentages there, why that's important. And then the albumin and silver nitrate form a light sensitive silver salt, right? Silver chloride, right? That's why it's called silver chloride. Just like silver iodide, silver bromide, et cetera, all the halogens there. When the glass negatives is placed directly onto the paper and exposed to light, it forms an image on the paper. So let's take a look at this. I'm going to actually mute the video so we can just, I'll talk through it. But I'm going to skip through quite a bit of this. So I'm loading this negative up on a sensitized sheet of what I use crowbar paper. And this is what's called a contact printing frame or printing frame, contact frame, whatever you want to call it. A piece of glass goes over the negative of the paper. I lock it into place, flip it over, lock the back of it, and then we're going to go out and expose it. So let me jump over here. I'm just going to speed it up. There it is, framed up. So there it is, sitting in some shaded light. A few minutes later, we start through the process. We can take a look at it here. This is my first look at it. And this is a long process. I think this was 16, 18, 20 minutes, something like that. But you can start seeing the paper take on the image, right? A little weak, of course, but it's taking on the image. So that's the first iteration. Here's the second iteration. A little darker there. We're getting there. So we pop it out, and we're going to go into the darkroom after probably the third time we look at it. I think it's about 20 minutes. So there it is coming out of the printing frame. let's jump ahead. We're washing it. This is crowbar paper. We're going to tone it. It gets very light. I go through all the process. We're going to get to washing it, toning it, fixing it. Here we go. We're going to tone it. It's going to be a short tone. We're going to talk about Sutton's method here, which is not a short tone. These dry down and gain a lot of contrast. That orange color, we're going to wash it. We're going to go back through, toning and washing again. This whole process, I don't know, I filmed 10 or 15 minutes of it. Here we go. We're starting to get the color back. And finally, we're going to dry it. And we're going to let it wash. So at the end of the day, after it's washed and dried, it looks something like that. So that's an albumin print. Kind of quickly going through that. Let's go on to the next page here, and I'll show you the digital scan of or the copy of it. So there it is. I toned that down. This may be been a second one, I'm not sure on it, but I toned that down quite what it's called chestnut brown, as Sutton calls it. And there's the negative, quite dense negative. In the bottle, and some of the highlights on the shadows, that's 2.3 on the densitometer, something like that, a very dense negative. So let's talk about how Sutton goes through his process. And I want to distinguish what's different with mine versus his. And we'll look at some of Dale's little testing around this week. So remember, this process is designed for the iodizer only collodion and a dense negative. And it also requires a double coating of the paper. Keep that in mind as we go through this. This is Sutton's method number 1, where he didn't add a bromide to the collodion. Very dense, rich negatives, right? Iodizer only. So when the negative has been taken and varnished, the next operation is to print from it and thereby obtain any number of positive copies on paper in which the lights and shades are true to nature. To do this, a sheet of paper is prepared and rendered sensitive in the manner about to be described. And then exposed to light in a pressure frame. He calls it a pressure frame. We call it a contact printer, whatever you want to call it. In close contact with the negative for a few minutes. The light passing through the light parts of the negative darkens the sensitive paper below or beneath. And at the same time, the dark parts of the negative stop the light, or the highlights stop the light and leave the sensitive paper beneath unchanged. So the highlights on the bottle you just saw didn't have any change. That was paper, and the dark parts were thinner parts of the negative. Makes sense, right? Thus, the print is produced, and by subsequent operations, a sensitive material which has not been acted on light is removed. That's what I was doing in the wash pans. Print is rendered insensitive to further action of light. It may be mounted on cardboard, preserved in the same way as drawings or engravings. So he goes on to say, it is customary to print upon albuminized paper because the albumin gives greater delicacy of detail and more transparency to the shadows. The process about to be described is not suitable for plain paper because it would yield flat, mealy proofs of disagreeable inky color. So in a nutshell there, he's saying there's a specific type of paper that you need to use for this process. And we're going to talk about that, just to be clear. For plain paper, a totally different process is employed, but few persons now use plain paper for printing. That is unnecessary to describe that method in the present work. The following is an outline. You albuminize it, excite it on the silver bath, expose it in the frame, wash it, tone the print with gold, fix it in sulfate or hypo, and wash out all the redundant chemicals, trim, mount it on cardboard. So let's talk about the first change. If you have my book, you're going to read about salt added into the beaten egg whites. This is what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about collecting up, and if you have fresh eggs, the fresher the eggs, the better. Take the whites from those eggs, or the albumin, and separate the chalazi, or he calls it the germs, right? The little attachment to the yolk. You want the yolk and that little chalazi or that germ attached to it, separate that out from the egg white. Froth those egg whites up really good. He says add 10 grains of salt for every ounce. So if you're going to make 1,000 mils of albumin, beaten egg whites, you add 22.75 grams of salt, ammonium chloride, sea salt, whatever you have, right? When the egg white is stale, it is very difficult to separate the white from the yolk. If any of the yolk or germs get into the albumin, that will produce red spots. You don't want any yolk in this albumin that you're making. Notice that's a 2.2% salt there. Just keep that in mind for a minute, and we're going to talk about the how it differentiates from my method or what I've used in the past. Beat the whole to the froth so stiff that a silver fork will stand upright in it, right? Let it settle for a few hours and then beat up the whole again. That's what you don't read very often. You only read whip it up, get what's called stiff peaks, like you're making meringue. Get stiff peaks, cover it, put it in your fridge, let the liquor or the albumin separate from the meringue, if you will, or the whisk stuff, and then filter it out. He says after it's set for a little while, beat it up again for a few hours, beat it up again. He really pushes that through. The decanted liquor is now ready for use. Unless you beat up the albumin twice, it will not dry in an even film on the paper, but will run down in streaks. I've actually had that happen. So that's an excellent point right there. First change, the amount of salt used. Second change, beat those egg whites up twice. Filter the albumin through a dampened muslin folded twice in a flat dish and remove the air bubbles, drying a strip of paper over the surface, meaning that I use a little piece of cardboard and I draw it over the top to remove the air bubbles off of the albumin. The paper should be that known as Rive or Rive, however you want to say it. Dale pointed out that it's a town in France. No other kind seems to answer so well, unless you have crowbar. And I'm going to show you that paper. That's what I use. Cut it into sheets of the proper size and float the best side on the sheet on the albumin, leaving it a half a minute, 30 seconds. Put down on your albumin's in the pan, put it down on the albumin for 30 seconds, not 3 minutes. And Dale's commenting here. Yes, the reason Sutton's beating it twice is he's not adding acid. We do add a tiny bit of glacial acetic acid. That does break down the structure better. But still, that's really, the glacial acetic acid will add to that, but you can really help it out, if you will, if you have the time and you want to do that. Yeah, I don't think both double coating, we'll talk about this, floating it twice. They weren't aware of hardening the albumin before you do that, and they definitely weren't aware of the acid to break down the albumin. So it'll streak it'll streak down. I've had that even with glacial acetic acid used. So there could be something to that. We're just talking about his method here. So the paper that we use is crowbar, or that I use is crowbar. Put it on the albumin for 30 seconds. I recommend 3 minutes, but 30 seconds. That's what he calls. Then remove it, hang it to dry and pin in the top corners of the edge, and he uses a glass rod to take the excess off. So dry. Okay, it goes on page 122. He says, remove the drippings, right, the albumin, by a glass rod drawn against the edge of the paper, and collect them in a measure to be added afterwards to the rest of the albumin and filtered again. The paper should be hung up in a very hot room and dried quickly. That's another thing we have to kind of pay attention to. After they are dry, albuminize them a second time and hang them up to dry by pins to the corners of what was before the bottom edge. He said, so reverse it. You dried it one time this way, float it again, and dry it this way. He's trying to even the coat of albumin out on the paper. Here's the problem with that. You need to double coat. Albumin needs to be hardened. The egg whites need to be hardened with time or heat or with alcohol. And obviously they didn't know about that at this time. If you float paper once, let it dry and float it again, you're just floating the majority of that albumin off. You're not going to double coat it. It's not going to work. You need to harden that albumin paper before you float it again. We use 70% isopropyl alcohol, and we add the amount of salt that you put in the albumin, so that doesn't strip it out either. So you need to balance this out. And that came out of Riley's book, Albumin and Salted Paper book. And we don't really know when they figured all this stuff out. Dale and I were talking about it this week. But so he didn't really get a double coat on that paper. The more albumin there is upon the paper, the finer will be the color of the print. That's for sure. I've done 4 coats on paper of albumin, a piece of albumin paper before. And man, the glossy, beautiful nature of that paper is really hard to beat. But that's a lot of work for one print. I mean, that's a lot of work. And so, you know, if you have the proper negative and it's right and this process works, definitely at least double coat it, minimum 2 coats. Single coated albumin doesn't really do anything for me. You cannot get such good prints on paper albuminized only once and with a diluted solution. Never use stale albumin because it tinges the paper yellow, meaning the egg whites start to break down. Same with heating it. Heat will yellow the egg whites. Time, that's why albumin prints aren't very archival. Time will yellow the egg whites, etc., etc. He goes on to talk about his taking a patent out on his new method of preparing paper. This is the paper that I recommend you use if you're going to make albumin prints. It's called Crowbar from Canson. It's very thin. It's very similar to the paper he recommends. Very thin, very lightweight, durable, puts up with a lot of abuse in washing and toning and printing, all that kind of stuff. So keep that in mind. If you're going to pursue albumin printing, use Crowbar. So here's the next thing. To render the paper sensitive. So you floated your albumin paper. You have your salt in it. Hopefully you've double coated it. It's dried, etc. To render the paper sensitive, float it for 2 minutes on a solution of silver nitrate, strength of 100 grams to the ounce. That's a 22% solution. 220 grams of silver nitrate to 1 liter of water, distilled water. The bath must on no account be weaker than this. On no account, it can't be weaker than this. In fact, he reiterates this a couple of times. The bath, you cannot get first-rate prints with a weak silver nitrate bath. Commercial silver nitrate having acid reaction will do, meaning, again, they had this triple crystallized silver that was really high quality for your collodion negatives and positives. And then they had this slightly acidified silver. I guess it was cheaper, but it would answer the call for this because you want it slightly acidified. There's no necessity to use the more costly recrystallized salt. Hang up the papers and dry as before. As soon as they are dry, make use of them, meaning don't sensitize them and put them in your paper box and come back a week later and think you're going to get a decent print. Don't excite the papers one day and use them the next. If they should become discolored too quickly in hot weather, add a few drops of nitric acid to the bath. They must not be dried too quickly in a hot room. They ought to take at least an hour to dry. The bath should never be alkaline. So there he's saying, don't have a hot room to dry this silver after you float it on the silver bath. Don't use a hot room to dry it. It should take at least an hour to dry. And also make sure your bath isn't alkaline or basic. Make sure it's a little bit acidic. That's what he's talking about there. When you've done that, when you have done with the bath, put it in the stock bottle and add a little kaolin or China, I call it China clay. It works really well. After you float a few, I make 1 liter bottles of silver to float paper on, albumin paper. And after you do that a couple of times, it'll turn red on you. If you do this right after you float paper, shake it up in China clay or kaolin, you will clear that bath. That organic material will cling to that and you can decant it off. If it were put away without the addition, it would turn brown, or mine turned red, so brown or red. It's not good to have that material in there. The strength of the bath should be tested by a hydrometer and more silver added from time to time to keep it up to the proper strength. Again, you want that 22%. Exposure in the contact frame. Strong negatives should be printed in sunshine and feeble ones in diffused light. So soft or thin negatives in diffused light, strong negatives in direct sunlight. Expose the print a little darker than you wish. it to be when finished. With a little practice, you may judge the color of the outside border. That's what I was talking about in my video there. The print has been exposed enough. It's better not to open the back of the pressure frame and examine the print too often. I do it 2 times, maybe 3 times. It just depends. In low light, but I was in kind of bright light shooting that video. So this is likely to injure the definition or give a double outline. That means coming out of register. If you don't have a good frame, you'll move your negative a little bit and you'll double print. It'll come out of register. Learn to judge as soon as you can by the appearance of the margin of the paper, which with a good negative ought to be bronzed. And bronzing is one of those things where it's hard to describe, but you'll see it. It's like almost like a green metallic bronzed over color. It goes this rich eggplant and then it goes to this bronzing over. Yes, Dale, that is correct. People do this all the time. A hot room also means hair dryers. I found this made silver transition really dark, almost black, where it should be a reddish tone. Yes, you're changing the silver crystals, the chloride, the silver chloride at that point using that heat. So people that use hair dryers to do that, you're changing the print. You're actually damaging it, if you will. Unless the print looks very vigorous in color when it's removed from the pressure frame, it is of no use to tone and fix. It'll never be a good print. Just chuck it, right? That's what he's saying. So now let's go to gold toning. As soon as the print's removed from the pressure frame, soak it in about the distilled water to remove all the free silver from the print. That's what the first thing I did. You saw in the video there. He says about 9/10 of the silver which the paper imbibed in the nitrate bath will now be recovered, and this way afterwards thrown out. He's talking about saving that again, saving the silver that you pull off this. They were very frugal. Thus, although a very strong bath is used in order to coagulate the albumin and give a fine, vigorous print, you recover most of the silver in the form of chloride, and this is more economical than to spoil a whole batch of prints and have them turn flat, rusty, and mealy by using a weak bath. Very interesting comment there. When the print has soaked for a few minutes in the distilled water, wash it with rainwater, then put it in a dish containing water to which a pinch of salt has been added. This is where he's really going to pull all that free silver out of there. After which, wash it again and put it in the gold toning bath. You do not want to put a print that still has that free silver on it in your gold tone. That's a good way to get rid of your gold. The object of this salt water is to remove every trace of free nitrate because this would decompose the gold toning solution. The best gold toning bath consists of, it goes on to talk about Mr. Bailey here. Again, he loves Mr. Bailey. When it altogether ceases to tone, it should be thrown away. No deposit ought to be formed in the bath, and it should remain clear and colorless to the last. The best prints are got in a weak bath, a weak gold toning bath, which tones slowly. Those which require a half an hour to tone are better than those which are toned in 5 minutes. There's another big tip right there. A weak bath, which tones slowly, is better than a strong bath, which tones quickly. Whilst the print is still in the toning bath, it must be carefully watched and occasionally examined quickly by white light. It must be left in until a deep tint of brown, verging upon purple, and loses the rusty red color which it had at first. And soon as this decided change of tint is perceived, but not before, take it out of the toning bath and wash it with water. Don't leave it in the bath until it becomes a cold blue color. Always remember that the print dries much blacker than it looks in the water. So true. So here's a gold toning, which I call an alkaline toner, borax toner. 40 mils of 1% gold chloride, 10 grams of borax, and 1 liter of distilled water. Makes you a nice gold toner, an alkaline toner. To fix a print, 8 to 10% sodium thiosulfate bath. I like to use 2 of them if it's a serious print and you want to keep it. Immerse it face upwards in a solution of hypo, of lime, strength, 1 part of the salt to 8 parts of the water. There need to be more than enough solution in the dish to cover the print. And what he's implying here is there's so many people emailing me now about these dots and changing colors of their plates, or not prints in this case. I don't see many prints out there, but plates, and they're using their hypo too long and they're not washing well enough. And what he's implying is just use enough to cover the print because you're probably actually going to throw that away after you're finished. It now loses some of its dark color, which is acquired in the toning bath. And again, he's toning before he fixes. You can do it either way. You can tone after you fix, but it always recovers his tone on drying. Very true. Allowance must always be made in toning for the change of color which the print takes when dry. Otherwise, it will look black when finished. The best color when dry is a rich, warm chestnut black and not a cold blue like writing ink. And I was verging on that on my print there. Leave it in the bath about 20 minutes. Leave it about 20 minutes in the hypo bath. There's a 20-minute fix right there. We recommend today, we say we do 2 baths of about 4 or 5 minutes each, 10% solution, which is, about half of that time. Then several changes of water on a tap. Leave it to soak in the water. Frequently change during 4 or 5 hours. This is a huge investment for a print. That's a huge investment for a print, to my mind. Then hang it up to dry. The hypo, which has fixed the print, must be thrown away and not used again. There it is. One-shot deal. So if it applies to prints, it will apply to plates. Just keep that in mind for you spotted changing color plates. Then he talks about trimming it, running it through a press, burnishing it basically, putting it on. The paper is really ratty and not ratty, crinkly, and you want to make sure you get it smoothed out. Puts a great finish on it, especially if you've got double or triple coated on it. It looks really great. So going over to page 128. The points in the above process upon which great stress is laid are the paper, fresh albumin applied twice, a double coating at least, but you need to harden that, we know. 100-grain silver nitrate bath, and a rather weak toning bath and long toning, and a fresh fixing solution for every print. There it is. He just summarized those very important highlights about how he achieves the best albumin prints you can get. Really good stuff right there. Positives printed by this process have perfectly clean whites and rich chestnut blacks, free from redness on the one hand and inky blueness on the other. They also have the highest possible vigor and brilliancy of effect. The most common causes of failure are using the wrong kind of paper, diluted albumin only applied once, a weak silver nitrate bath below 22%, an improperly made gold bath which bleaches the prints, meaning it's too strong, overtoning and too strong a bath, and old hypo, which has been used before and causes the print to fade. You can't sum it up cleaner than that, ladies and gentlemen. He made very, very clear on that. Now, I just want to talk real quickly about the resinized paper. This is really interesting. Let's just read this real quick. Since I commenced writing this chapter on printing, a suggestion has been made by Mr. Cooper to print upon paper prepared with a salted alcoholic solution of some gum resin instead of albumin. The object being to produce prints without a glaze and resembling engravings. For a certain class of subjects, it's no doubt desirable to get rid of the glaze of albumin. But although the plain paper prints are better when obtained by a process of development than when printed by continued exposure to light, still the resining process is good for the latter method for printing and yields more vigorous and better tones than when the paper is merely salted. So here he goes, resonating solution. So he's got a specific gravity of 825 on 1 ounce of alcohol, some lac, some of this stuff here, right? The shellac lac. Calcium chloride, and white sugar. So he says this mixture, when properly dissolved and filtered, is perfectly clear in the color of pale sherry. Immerse the sheets of paper in it, hang them on up to dry, then treat them exactly the same way as albuminized paper, observing only that the toning bath acts rapidly and energetically. Prints on resinated paper are soft and artistic. So here we go. Dale, this is Dale. This is what Dale sent me. Let's see. Better to, dry naturally. Absolutely. Yeah. A warm room is good, not a hot room to dry albumin paper. So Dale was kind enough to run Sutton's albumin printing. His negative was not method 1, right? And double coating wasn't a thing here because you can't float without hardening. You can't get that double coat really, truly. So on the left, he has using Strathmore paper and not crowbar. Strathmore is wonderful, though. I made albumin prints on Strathmore before. But the left is albumin using Sutton's printing method, and the right is one of his salt prints. So I say notes. This is on Strathmore paper, single coat of albumin. Also, this was printed with a soft negative like method 2, right? The iron and pyro redevelopment could change drastically with an iodizer only, and crowbar paper and a true double float. I should put that on there. A true double floated paper. He said he was going to try to get us one today, but he didn't quite make it. But we appreciate that, Dale. That's good to see. So there's a good example. And if you want to chime in here, Dale, you're more than welcome. But there you can see the difference in a salt and albumin paper print. Although, again, there's some caveats. There's some things that, you know, we haven't really talked about. So if you want to chime in, you can. No worry, Craig. Good to see you. Garden duties. Yeah, I have those garden duties as well. So let's do technical questions and answers. This came from a student in Europe, a person trying to learn wet collodion. He said, so after reading your book and listening to all your videos, thank you for that. I would like to ask if you know anyone in France or close to it, such as Switzerland, Germany, Italy, who will accept me as a student or intern, very motivated to learn and understand any aspect of this kind of art. So if you're out there, and I kept it anonymous, so I can write him back. If you're out there around those countries and you want to mentor or help somebody, send me an email and I'll put you in contact with him. Okay, let's go back here. Dale's chiming in. I know I moved quickly here. It was floated per Sutton's instruction, 2 floats. Yeah. That's the thing. It doesn't really matter if you float it twice. It's really only a single coat because you float the first coat off after it's dried if you don't harden that albumin. So really, it's just a single coat. True. And as a result, the essence is the same. Yes, exactly right. Yep, that's right. So that's a single coat. And that's not bad for a single coat. You imagine on crowbar, double coated, and with a really method 1 negative. And we'll get to that. I'm definitely going to run these tests as well, but we appreciate you doing that, Dale. It's interesting to see. I like it regardless. And then the second one, this is from Eugene Cole. He says, I know that your next show is on pot printing, this show here, printing out process printing. I'm hoping, let's just define pot printing, printing out paper or printing out processes, use light energy in a contact frame and a negative in a piece of paper, versus developing out paper, where you put it in the enlarger and then throw it in a bath of chemistry and it comes up. That's developing out. This is printing out. Those are the differences in those two things. This doesn't work under an enlarger. You can't put a piece of albumin paper under your, omega D and crank it up and focus a negative and make a print. Doesn't work, and throw it in a chemical bath. It doesn't work. Oh, there you go. Let's see. Sorry, I'm moving too fast here. Let me go back. I'm moving too fast here. Chopper. Could the plastic-based paper often used in carbon printing also be used for albumin prints? You're talking about Yupo, Chopper. You're talking about Yupo paper. Yes. So that's a great question. I've never made an albumin print on Yupo paper. I poured plenty of gelatin on Yupo paper, and it's great for that. Try it and see what happens. I'm not really sure. I don't know if it'll work or not, to be honest with you, Chopper. That's a great question. My concern would be that the albumin has to soak into the paper a little bit to grab on, and that Yupo is just a hard plastic. So you can always try it. It's an interesting question, though, for sure. Craig, where are you getting your blonde varnish from? This is, let me pull this up. Where did I? Oh, I have the invoice for it right here. Let me jump here real quick. This is what he's talking about here. Weller Mart. And that is Super Blonde Shellac Flakes. Yeah, from Weller Mart, right? Yeah, Weller Mart LLC, right there. And that's Super Blonde, quarter pound. What did that cost me? I don't even know what it cost me. I've forgotten now. let's see, that 1/4 pound, which will make plenty of varnish. I don't know. It doesn't even have the price on here. 10 or 12 bucks or something. It's cheap. Well or Mark, go check them out. You'll see. You'll see where it's at there. Good stuff, though. Tough finding crowbar, Steve. Yes. Any sources you can cite. There is, let me go over here and make sure this is still legit. It used to be, if you're in Europe, you can get it, of course. It used to be that you could get it at Freestyle, but I'm not sure you can anymore. Doesn't look like you can get it at Freestyle anymore. I would call Canson and ask them if they can send you some crowbar. I brought back a ton from Europe, so yeah, I know I probably kind of cutting the head off there, right? But I would contact Canson and ask him if you can get some crowbar from him. Or have a friend in Europe send you some. That's what you can do too. Absolutely, Craig. Can I go back and add a 3rd or 4th coat? Yes. Yes, a good point. Can I go back and add a 3rd, 4th, 5th, 10th coat of albumin on paper that was double coated several weeks ago? As long as you harden that paper between floats, you can add as many layers, coatings as you want. Oh, okay. $10.99 for a 1/4 pound. I thought it was 10 or 15 bucks. Yeah, good for the shellac. Yeah, no problem. No problem, Steve. And I also recommend Freestyle. Steve, contact Freestyle and ask them what they use in lieu or in substitution of crowbar for paper. They have a substitution for it. I just can't think of what it is right now, but they do have a substitution for it. So let's see here. Where were we? So, yeah, and any questions, yeah, just post them over there. I'll get to them. I may have to jump back and forth. But so Eugene talks about the pot paper, and the differences between developing out and printing out paper is very important to understand because they're very different processes, completely work on different ways. So he says, I know your next show's on pot printing, the one I'm doing right now. I'm hoping you can touch on the differences between emulsion pot and salted pot. Several years ago, I did a lot of gold tone pot printing using contemporary sheet film, on gelatin chloride paper from Chicago Albumin Works and had great results. Absolutely. I wrote him back and I told Eugene that I think it was 2009 or 2010, must have been 2009. I lived in Europe. I was calling around trying to find my favorite paper, which was the Chicago Albumin Works paper. They call it pot paper. And I found the last box of 50 sheets in Rotterdam at a photo store of the Chicago Albumin Works paper. And I loved that. That paper, like he said, it was a gelatin chloride paper. So what are the differences here in the papers is what he's asking. So the differences between salted pot, right? So we're whipping up egg whites and adding salt in it, ammonium chloride, sea salt, whatever. That's salted pot printing. We're whipping up gelatin chloride, works on using gelatin and using the gelatin as the binder and then brushing silver on and making prints. The gelatin is and it's got a salt in it, right? But the gelatin is the binder, and the egg whites are the binder in silver chloride prints. There really are no differences in that case, right? They're just using a different binder. So your albumin prints, your salt prints, your gelatin chloride prints, your collodio-chloride prints, they're all using a salt, but they're using different binders, meaning they're using a gelatin, egg whites, whatever. I'm just drawing a blank here on some other examples. Those are the differences. And he says, now I'm working with wet plate. I would like to print pop again. I'm sure you know CA Dutch Chicago Albumin Works is no longer manufacturing. It's unfortunate I do. So I'm curious about the technical aesthetic differences between the two processes. No real differences, just the binder. If you like the Chicago Albumin Works paper, Eugene, I recommend that you dive in and do collodio-chloride prints. That's using collodion as the binder. You add salt to it. Strontium chloride is the salt in that case. Or you can actually do gelatin chlorides. I've got recipes for that in my book as well. So, and the same concept there, right? It's just the binder that changes. They're all silver chloride prints because at the end of the day, that's what you're making. So I hope that makes sense. No real differences there, honestly. So next week, we'll talk about Sutton's dry process. If you want to go through that, we'll run through his dry process. We'll look at the tannin, his rapid dry, look at those kinds of things. If you want to do that, you can join us then. What else? Let's see. Roger Sasaski says, if you can't find Crowbar in a pad, try to find Canson Art Book Pro. Yeah, that's what it was. Uses Crowbar paper. Yep, that's what it was. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Steve likes dry collodion. It's good. It's fun. It's a good one. Yeah, we'll go through that and check it out. So let's go on. And this is everybody, probably everybody here knows who Beaumont Newhall was, right? Beaumont, Newhall was, in the recommended watching, I put the link up here too. We'll just watch a couple of minutes of his video, but you can read here. This is this book called The History of Photography from 1839 to present. Since its first publication, 1937, which is almost 90 years ago, right? 85, 89 years ago. This lucid and scholarly chronicle of the history of photography has been hailed as a classic work on the subject. It's very, very good. I've been emptying my shipping container out. I've got a whole bunch of my books. You'll see probably next week I'll have most of my bookshelves filled up with my books. I've tried to find and research the best books for people interested in the history of photography, these processes, the concepts, the philosophies behind it all. And this is definitely one of a great classic book for the history of photography. And if you haven't seen it, you should look it up. Through more than 300 works by such masters, photographers, Fox Talbot, O'Sullivan, Julia Margaret Cameron, Ajay, Emerson, Stieglitz, Strand, all these great guys, Weston, Dorothea Lange, Walker Evans, Adams is in there, Versailles, Cartier-Bresson, Callahan, White, Frank, Dean Arbus, all of them. They're all in there. It's a great book. I highly recommend it. Let's jump over here. I'm just going to play a couple of minutes of this.
America as far as the history of the medium.
It's hard not to sound like you're glorifying Newhall and his contribution, but in truth, he can be singled out, I suppose, on a more vast scale. It would be someone like Einstein, who really, all the books say, was first with relativity. Niels Bohr, many of his colleagues had written, but at a later date, but everybody gave Einstein credit for these great calculations. Well, Newhall was really absolutely virtually alone.
I look at Newhall and his generation of scholarship as something that possessed grace, that possessed elegance, that possessed a kind of humility and understanding, and above all, was based on the fact that probably the visual arts are the most characteristic human voice. That no longer exists.
Being able to look back at Beaumont's life through his work and his curating and his writing and his own photography, we're able to see the history of photography firsthand, keeping in mind, of course, that photography is only 150 years old. And Beaumont, in a sense, his work started this in 1937.
He is gracious, he is kind, he is gallant. He has a kind of masculine old world charm. He is very considerate. He has a memory like a steel trap. And he gives you anything you want. I've been a receiver of his wisdom and of his memory. He's like a daguerreotype himself. He's like a walking, talking, moving daguerreotype because he just drinks it all in and reflects it back. He's a gentleman of the old world, and we don't find many of those around anymore who welcome us into their homes, who sit us down at lunch and give us the oral history of the history of photography in America and in Europe. So when you sit with him until he talks about photography, you're there with him, with whomever he met. And it's very exciting. It's exciting in a very quiet, genteel way.
One of my earliest recollections as a child was standing in my mother's darkroom. She was an avid photographer, and she had a beautiful, beautiful studio on the top floor of our house in Lynn, Massachusetts, where I was born. She worked in a very classic way with a big 6.5 by 8.5 inch camera, and her portraits of the family and of friends were very beautiful. They were of the style that fitted right into the pictorial photography movement of the turn of the century. And I remember standing in the darkroom while she was developing that. And I was just amazed at seeing the pictures come up in the fluid, magic fluid. I didn't know what it was. I liked it so much, I put my finger in and tasted it. And Mother yanked me out of the kitchen, out of the darkroom, and washed my mouth out. So that was my first touch of photography. My interest began with motion pictures, rather unusually, but I was absolutely delighted with some of the imported pictures that we had from Germany, and the experimental camera really impressed me greatly. And I was a student at Harvard at that time, studying the history of art.
Follow the crowd. Get the big.
I'll put the link up here for that. It's a good video. It's on New Mexico's PBS station. It's very good, and it's quite long, but it goes into depth, and it has it's worth watching. If you like the history of photography, you'll like that, I'm sure. So, Steve Wilson was looking for, and for anyone that's looking for this, hold on a second. Let me see if I can do this. I'm going to stop sharing here. And I'm going to pull this up. The link is in the chat. I went to my old website and found this years ago. It's years ago. This is what I used before moving to Europe. And it was, for Americans, it's quite popular. I think that's it, 11 by 14. That's what it looks like. That's $13.99. Yes, Linda, Crowbar is normal drawing paper. It is. And you saw the cover of that. This is on free sale for Americans that can't get Crowbar. If you're in Europe, you can get Crowbar, about anywhere. This is on. This is what I was looking on Freestyle's website earlier. I couldn't find it, but this is what you want right there. That sketch pad. It works great. I used it before I moved to Europe. It worked just perfectly fine. So, and this is 11 by 14. 100 sheet pad is $14 US. So, anyway. What else is there? Not much. Next week we'll look at dry processes, dry collodion processes, and try to make that interesting for you. if you've never looked at dry collodion stuff before, you might find it interesting. It's not that difficult. It's just used in a different way because it has different uses, right? It needs a lot of light. The exposures are long. But if you're trying to make images where you can't bring a dark box, access might be a problem. You know, you don't have a mobile darkroom. You're not set up for that kind of thing. You probably would be, though, if you're doing wet collodion, dry collodion, just a little extra step, which is not much, the tannin process. So we will delve into that. We'll describe what's going on there next week. Probably the most, he didn't use dry collodion, he used dry plates, was Edward Curtis. To me, dry collodion, dry plates, gelatin dry plates, the precursor to the plastic film that we used to use. Dry collodion has a lot of the similar visuals or aesthetics of that as that does. So for me, there's something really important with a wet collodion process that gives a certain aesthetic that I'm after, a more, you know, one of my words is memory, a more throwback in time, you know, that kind of thing. So wet and dry are very different, not necessarily in the execution. It's just the tannin process. It's just a solution we put on to kind of encapsulate and keep the exposure active, if you will. And you know, there's some advantages and disadvantages to everything, right? And that's why we like to explore. Look at it, see if you like it or not, and then kind of go from there. Absolutely. Well, you're very welcome. Oh, thank you. I appreciate that, brother. I appreciate hearing that. Let's see. Dale says, with its 112 sheet Canson crowbar permanent drying paper, 96 grams. Yep. Universal oxide is all-purpose durable in all senses. Yeah, it's super, super paper. It's really good. This is what I advertised, you know, way back in the day. And again, if you're in America or even Canada, I guess Dale can't get crowbar either. Go to the freestyle link that I put up there. I hope you guys got it right. Let me see. There it is. I'll put it up there again. There's the freestyle link. That's from my old website years ago. I just jumped in there. I couldn't remember the name of it. But yes, you're very welcome. I'm going to let everyone go. Stay healthy. Stay happy. We're at 11 o'clock a.m. right now, and I got things to do, and I'm sure you do too. Thanks for joining me. I hope you can join me next week. Have a great week, and we'll see you next Saturday. Ciao.